Eccoci. Chissà poi se registra anche la chat di lato o solo il monitor, spero, perché la chat è veramente inutile da vedere.
Ok.
Ah, posso scriverti la chat solo a te o a tutti? O quasi quasi la metto solo a te, perché tanto
Sì,
così filtri tu le domande.
sì, sì, sì.
Allora, tecnicamente se tu poi vai sulla pagina del Trieste Photo Days con Facebook, lì però devi spegnere il volume perché ti lagga, perché viene dopo.
Aspetta, sì, sì. Dov'è che devo spegnere il volume? Su Zoom?
No, allora, se tu guardi il video su Trieste Photo Days,
Ah, aspetta, sì, scusami.
perché lì tu vedi la chat della gente.
Ok. Ah, ecco.
E che, diciamo poi che se metti il video poi dovresti mutarlo.
Aspetta, che io ho queste foto days. Non vedo dov'è? Il canale del Trieste Foto Days. Cioè io sulla pagina del Trieste Foto Days non vedo chat.
No, no, no,
Mi metti-
perché devo avviarla.
Ah, ok. Quindi sulla pagina però
Sì,
comparirà.
sì, perché sennò ci mette che siamo qui.
Ah, ok, ok. Sì.
Adesso mi carico il WhatsApp perché io man mano invito gente
Sì.
a un minuto. Boh, se no io anche avvio, così proviamo che lui adesso che torna alle
Sì, inizia ad
8.
avviare, poi secondo me...
Allora io mi nascondo qua, mi disattivo. Io mi metto anche muto, poi se serve lo attivo il microfono, ma tu sei il padrone di casa.
Ah, ok.
Ecco, se vuoi farmi
Oh,
intervenire,
vabbè, ma tanto secondo me no, puoi stare, tanto anche perché volevo ringraziarti così perché avevi, insomma, reso possibile questa cosa.
ah, ok,
Eh,
boh. Allora, allora faccio così, diciamo che mi riattivo il video un attimo, saluto tutti e metto il Trieste Photo Days. Allora,
sì,
adesso
sì.
faccio partire. I make it go. Allora, I go live, Trieste
Ok.
Photo Days.
Ma io non vedo comunque niente. Mi mandi il link della pagina Trieste Foto, cioè almeno del...
Un attimo,
Sì, sì.
che non mi dà il permesso di fare lo stream, ovviamente. It doesn't allow me on Facebook. I do it again. It was working before. I avoided. I lost the description of the. Allora, this is what I hated page. Trieste Photo Days.
Ok.
1 second, I have to paste and copy. It always happens. Always happens. TPD Digital Talk. Okay. Share to your page. Trieste Photo Days. Go live. Okay. Now it's going. Maybe it asks you to accept the live. I don't know on your screen, but we are live. Okay.
Ok.
We are
I don't see anything.
now. Let's wait. But we are live. Okay. We are.
I don't see anything.
You don't see. I mean, you have to refresh the Trieste Today's page. But you will see yourself on Zoom. You don't see. I mean, you have to refresh the Trieste. There are already 7 people online. But you will see yourself on Zoom. Okay, I will. There are already 7 people online. Okay, I will. Vincenzo,
Yes.
We are online. We are live.
Okay. Ah, okay.
Slowly.
Well, I don't see. Okay. Do you see me?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, we are. Okay. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this digital talk with Kadir van Lohuizen. And thanks to all for being here. Thanks to Stefano for making this event possible, and many thanks to Kadir for his presence. Just a quick introduction for those who don't know much about the work of Kadir. Kadir is a photojournalist based in Amsterdam, and he mainly works on long-term projects about the environment. Besides still images, he uses different kinds of media, such as videos, books, and exhibition, and also interactive multimedia apps. That's why he considers himself more broadly as a visual storyteller. With his work, he covered many topics, such as conflicts in Africa and Middle East in his early career, the Katrina hurricane aftermath, the migration in the Americas with the project Via Panama, a 12-month journey from Patagonia to Alaska, the mismanagement of waste disposal in 6 megacities around the world with the project Wetlands, a collaboration with the Washington Post that was awarded with a World Press Photo in 2018. One of the many awards his photographs won. The project he is presenting today is called After Us the Deluge, a deep investigation about the rise of sea level in several parts of the world, a project that was published on the New York Times and in the form of a complex photo book that he calls Anti-Photo Book, where next to his pictures, there are lots of maps and articles written by scientific researchers, activists, and politicians. So, Kadir, please talk us about the work.
Yes. Well, good evening, and thank you for inviting me. I'm in Amsterdam, living below sea level, living on a boat, as you might notice. So I will float. So city very similar, or just as much as risk as Venice, among other cities in the world and other coastal regions. So yeah, I've been a photographer for over. I still think I'm young and upcoming, but I've been in the profession for over 30 years. Covered a lot of conflicts, but for the last 15 years or so, my stories are more indeed long-term projects and are more about environmental and issues and issues related to the climate crisis. So the work I want to share tonight is indeed well, it's probably my largest project because I started to work on this already in 2011. I was aware that that the world would be confronted with the rising sea level and that this would in the future have a big impact. But yeah, at that time I wasn't really aware that this was happening already, and that that many people in coastal regions and cities and elsewhere are already affected. And I you know, I mean, these projects always start because you read something, it starts small, you encounter people, you speak about it. So this was actually, I came across this when I was working on this other project, which you were talking about, which was about contemporary migration in the Americas. And halfway that project, I was I was in Panama, I was on the Caribbean side of Panama, beautiful islands. And I was interviewing people there, and they said that they were actually being evacuated. And so obviously I asked them, why are you being evacuated? And they said, because the sea is coming. Okay. So that was kind of the first time I started to realize that this was a problem of today and not for the next generation or the generation after. So that was basically the start of big research initially, because I thought if the people are affected there, they must be affected elsewhere. And yeah, that's how it started. And very difficult project to pitch in the beginning as well, because, you know, I mean, I think there's more knowledge now, or people understand that there's a real issue and that cities and regions are at risk. But at that time, it was not, you know, many of my colleagues and friends are like, what, maybe he's losing his mind. What is he talking about? So obviously photography is a powerful tool, you know. I mean, I'm not staging any images, I'm not manipulating, so what you see is real. Should I give you a glimpse?
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much.
So yeah, I mean, if there's any questions, we can speak about it afterwards. But if you have a specific question about an image or something I'm saying, you can interfere, and I will try to answer. Wait, I have to share a screen, right?
Yeah, thanks. Okay, perfect.
Yeah, I was looking at also at where it's actually coming from. You know, until not so long ago, the main reason for the sea level to rise was the warming of the ocean. So if water warms up, it expands. Nowadays, this is mainly taken over by the melting ice sheet of Greenland and Antarctica and glaciers elsewhere. So I spent quite a bit of time in Greenland. Incredible place, incredibly beautiful. There's a lot of ice, so you know, I mean, the Greenlandic ice sheet is 2 to 3 kilometers thick. So if that all would melt, the sea level just because of that reason would already rise by 7 meters. Obviously, we're not going to experience that in our lifetime, but if Antarctica melts, it would rise by 86 meters. So it has a big impact. And if you really want to see how quickly our climate is changing, you really need to be in the Arctic, because, you know, where we are experiencing on average maybe temperatures which have risen above maybe a bit more than 1 degrees. In Greenland and in the Arctic, it's over 5 degrees. So it's really going very rapid there. Wait, let me get rid of the sound. Oh, sorry. I'll wind quickly to where we were, sure. Which is Bangladesh. You know, Bangladesh is, people would say to me, it's quite obvious, you know, because they often have floods, they have cyclones, so there's always been a problem with floods. The difference now is that often when it floods, it doesn't disappear anymore, the water. So it's a delta, so which is great for farming, because it's you know, it's great to grow crops. At the same time, when the seawater comes in and it doesn't recede, it means that the land becomes saline and people can't grow their crops anymore. Yeah. So I've included some maps. So just you will see them coming back. The first map shows what happens if the sea level rises by 1 meter, and the second map shows what happens if it rises 2 meters. So for Bangladesh, it has very serious consequences. 50 million people in the Delta will have to be evacuated in the next 2 decades. And millions of people have left already, and often moved to the big cities, and they leave now because they lose their livelihood. You know, they used to be farmers and fishermen, and this is often what the landscape looks nowadays. Yeah. So yeah, people move to the cities, but that means that they you know, they can't be a farmer or a fisherman, so they're losing their livelihood. I've met a lot of people who moved to the cities, and in the end, they moved back because they still try to farm their land and make a living and take care of their family.
If I may ask, just a quick question. When you're there and you talk with the people, you're experimenting, I think maybe fear and despair, but do you experiment any kind of rage for what is happening?
Well, what's interesting is that, you know, a lot of people ask me, it must have been very depressing in Bangladesh. It's actually not, because, you know, I mean, in the people still have an ability to adapt, which is an ability we lost. You know, I mean, if the internet drops now, there will be a panic. If there's no electricity, people don't know what to do. In Bangladesh, people know how to respond, and they're not waiting for their government to act.
Yeah.
They are angry in a way that they feel among other nations, which is finally being addressed at the climate summits, is that they are paying a very high price. They are paying the highest price for basically the emissions which are caused by us.
Yeah.
So Bangladesh and definitely island states in the Pacific, they have very little emissions. So they feel that they are not responsible for this, and at least should be helped and compensated, which I agree with. So in that sense, people are angry, yeah, because, you know, I mean, most people don't drive a car there. They don't take a plane to go on holiday, but they're feeling the consequences.
Yeah.
I mean, they are, I mean, to give you an example how people adapt, you know, I mean, this is an island which is frequently flooded now in the Bay of Bengal. And what you see used to be rice paddies where people used to grow rice. But because of the frequent flooding, they can't grow the rice anymore. So they have turned their rice paddies into salt paddies. So they are mining salt actually, and they are selling the salt, and that's how they make a living as well nowadays.
Okay.
I mean, the Bangladeshi government is you know, they're investing a lot of money into coastal protection. So they're building these levees. But yeah, as you probably understand, Bangladesh has an enormous coastline, so they will not be able to protect the whole coast. So they will have to make choices which areas will be saved and which areas cannot be saved. So these are the former rice paddies.
Okay. Oh.
So, you know, many of the people I met, like here, you know, I mean, they are actually climate refugees, right? So they left their homes because it's not livable anymore. So
Where'd they go?
Well, many, as I said, they moved to the big cities. So these are villagers who came to Chittagong, which is the second city in Bangladesh. They live in this community, and they were under pressure to move because the city or the project developer wanted to build expensive apartments, but they refused to leave. And the next morning when I was there, the whole community went up in flames, which they said it was probably the project developer who set it alight to get them out. So they are displaced again.
So it's a kind of chain. So they tend to.
Yeah, and you know, I mean, we speak about climate refugees, but there's still no UN ruling that you can receive asylum for climate reasons.
Okay.
You know, to my knowledge, only one family once succeeded from the Pacific. They got asylum in New Zealand for reasons of the changing climate. But that at the later stage at the Supreme Court, they changed their mind and the family was sent back.
Oh.
So it's still a big issue. This is, by the way, the islands I was speaking about in Panama, where people told me that they would be evacuated. They are actually, it's called Cunayala because it's the land of the Cunas, which are the indigenous population of Panama.
Yeah.
So they have a strip of mainland which is higher, and that's where they are supposed to move to.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, this was when I started this project, I understood that aerials could be important because you see in an aerial much better the impact of what erosion actually does. So this was like before the drone era. So
Yeah.
you know, there were drones, but they were super big, very expensive, complicated to fly. So initially I had a kite.
Yeah.
So I had a small camera rig in the kite. So you can discover me somewhere in the middle of the picture. And if you look carefully, you see a white line. That's the kite line. So it was not a drone, it was a kite.
Okay, yeah, wonderful.
Problem is that you don't have live view. So, you know, I programmed the camera that it would shoot a picture every 1 or 2 seconds. And then I would just look at the angle of the wind and then hopefully would get the best picture.
Did you do a lot of training before to understand how to use the kind of the kite or just you just
not really. So you know, I made a lot of mistakes. Yeah, I mean, in the end, it was interesting. And obviously, the problem with the kite is that you can't fly it if there's no wind, and you can't fly it when there's too much wind. So it sometimes happened that I had to wait a week for some wind. So this is where the people are supposed to be relocated to. When I met them, it was 2011. They said they would be relocated in 2012. I went back in 2015. They were still not evacuated. And I think now they start to evacuate the first people.
I'm sorry,
So,
when you say relocated, is there any intervention from the government, or is there?
this was an intervention from the government, but then the problem was that it didn't happen because the money for relocation disappeared.
Okay.
Well, this is much closer to home. This is just across the North Sea for me. So this is because I figured that if this happens, yeah, as I said, you know, I mean, we assume that those problems maybe exist in Bangladesh or somewhere in the Pacific, but I thought if it happens there, it must be happening closer to home as well. So this is the east coast of the UK, just north of Hull. It's eroding, which is nothing new, you know, it's natural that coasts erode, but due to the rising sea level, the sea currents are changing. So this became the fastest eroding coast of Europe, which actually means that they are losing 2 to 3 meters a year. So the pictures you actually see, you can't take them anymore because this is sea now. These communities don't exist anymore. They're gone. So and you would think that maybe in Europe, government would take a little bit good care of their people. But most of these people were homeowners, so it was their home. The UK government decided not to protect those communities anymore, and the only compensation they got was £3,000 to move, but they all lost their homes. And this was just a year before the coastal road, which is obviously not there anymore.
Yeah, sure.
Well, this is the Pacific. You write Kiribati, but you pronounce it Kiribati. It's between Fiji, right in the middle between Fiji and Hawaii. So it's really the middle of nowhere in the Pacific. It's a country, it's an island nation. There's about a bit over 100,000 people who live over various atolls. The highest point in the country is about 1.5 meters. So you can imagine what happens if it rises by 2 meters. So it basically means that Kiribati is one of the countries which will cease to exist probably. Well, they know that for sure everybody needs to be evacuated latest 2050, if not earlier. And I went there also because I don't think we really think about what happens with a country that disappear, right? We can speak about cities that disappear or regions that disappear, but if a whole country disappears, what happens to the people? Where do they go? What happens to their culture? What happens to their language? It's not just Kiribati, there's Tuvalu, there's the Maldives, there's a number of nations which will not exist in 50 to 100 years from now. And this issue is not being addressed where they need to go. So actually the former president and the government, they thought we're going to take action by ourselves. So they purchased land actually on Fiji. And they send out a press release that they would move their people in the future to Fiji. They didn't really discuss this with the government of Fiji, so they were not very amused. They were like, what do you mean you're moving your country to our country? So officially now they purchased the land to grow crops to export back to Kiribati because they can't grow crops anymore. So yeah, it's a pretty desperate situation. The only lifeline which is there, which you can see on the right, is the international airport. They're trying to save the runway at all costs, because if they lose the airport, well, there's a ferry twice a year to Fiji, but that's it.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Well, Miami, I guess you all know, Miami is, as many cities, unprotected. So with 2 meters sea level rise, it means that, well, you see the famous Miami Beach, and parts of Miami will be flooded. And there's a specific problem in Miami, which is that it's built on limestone. And limestone is not so bad to build on. There's only one problem, is that it's porous. So often the Dutch are called because of our skills to build dikes and coastal knowledge about coastal protection. So all the experts have been there. You can build a dike on limestone, but the water will just zip under it, and it will not. You can't protect the city. So basically, Miami is doomed, and for sure, Miami Beach needs to be evacuated in the next 20 years, if not quicker. And it's just impossible to protect. So in like 500 years, Miami will be 200 miles from the US coast.
I'm sorry, speaking, I think that you spoke with lots of researchers, scientific researchers, and they told you about climate change in general. The change, it's impossible to go back in another situation. I mean, are we in a situation where there will be certainly a kind of change, of big change, climate change in the future? Also, if we put all our efforts to stop the carbon dioxide or any efforts that we can make?
We can slow it down, but we cannot stop it anymore. I mean, it's widely accepted among scientists that the tipping point, actually, when we could have reversed and stopped it, was in the mid-80s.
Oh.
So that's a long time ago. So you all know that we have to bring that we should not have temperatures rise more than 1.5 degrees in the world to stop a major catastrophe. But it doesn't, it will slow it down. It doesn't stop. There's not a question if the sea level will rise 1 meter, 3 meters, or 5 meters, or 7 meters. The question is when. So if we continue like we do now, and temperatures will rise not 1.5 but 2, but probably 3 degrees, it's gonna be a major catastrophe. And it means that by the end of the century, most of the Netherlands will not exist anymore. So I will be floating in my boat in Amsterdam, but there will be no Amsterdam anymore. This is Miami. This is Miami Beach. This is what they call sunny day flooding. It's very specific for there because it means that it floods. Although the sun is out, the sky is blue, and it hasn't been raining. So basically what happens here is that at high tide, the sea level already comes up through the drainage. So it's actually seawater in the streets.
And what was he doing, the guy there?
I asked him, obviously, and he said, I'm checking if there's no problem with the sewage, but then he said no, it's seawater.
Okay. Oh.
So when I was there was a hurricane racing towards the north of Florida. Nothing new about hurricanes. They're always there. There's a hurricane season. The difference is that they are more frequent and they are stronger. And basically what I wanted to show is that, you know, often hurricanes, there's wind damage, but most of the damage is usually a surge. So here there was a surge of 4 meters high or so, which rolled over the towns of the city, and well, basically it bulldozes everything. If there's no coastal protection, if there's no dike, it basically it's gone. So
it's a kind of double catastrophe, because also the hurricanes are getting also more powerful. And
they're getting more powerful, and you know, you can imagine if this happens, or if you get the surge of 4 meters, but in a couple of decades you have already sea level rise of 2 meters, and then you have a hurricane with a storm surge. It's a catastrophe. Well, Jakarta, one of the fastest growing cities in the world, has been exploding over the last 2 decades or so. There's now estimates that there are about 22 million people in the greater Jakarta. It was only 15 years ago that 70% of the city was above sea level, and now 80% is below sea level. And the main reason for that is that they are not only confronted by a rising sea level, but they are confronted by the fact that the city is sinking. And the city is sinking because they are extracting too much groundwater, because they need the groundwater. So the city is parts of the city are sinking 25 centimeters per year. So if you add a rising sea level, Jakarta is probably the city in the world which is most at risk.
Sorry,
there was a big.
Okay, sorry. No, I 2 pictures before. I was seeing with the guy with the mask. I just wanted to know what was happening in that picture. where there was the white mask?
He's a fisherman, so they have their self-made diving equipment. So they fishing for mussels.
Okay.
So there was a plan to protect the city, which was co-developed by the Dutch. So they would close the Bay of Jakarta so that tidal water could not reach the city anymore. But the plan went down because of protests from the fishermen, because they said we will lose our livelihood if you do so. There were financial issues. So in the end, it was decided that Indonesia is currently building a new capital, a new Jakarta. So they're going to relocate the city. The only problem is that they are relocating the government and not the people.
Yeah.
So what's going to happen to these 20 million people? Nobody knows. Well, to end with my own country, as you probably know, we live below sea level, or well, 60% of our country is below sea level. It's a delta. We are probably the best protected delta in the world. So, you know, I mean, we have a great coastal protection system. We know how to manage the water. At the same time, the funny thing with the climate crisis is that we always think it's happening somewhere else and not at home. So I think that the Dutch had a wake-up call probably 4 years ago, because the other interesting thing is about predictions about the climate crisis is that we always look at the best case scenario, and we always think it's going to be not so bad as being predicted. Well, the last few decades have shown us that it's always worse than what's being predicted. So the Dutch looked at what the worst case scenario would actually be for the Netherlands, and that would be that there's a possibility that the sea level would rise by 2 to 3 meters by the end of the century. So that means that most of the country will be underwater. So there are all kinds of wild plans to prevent to do this. But there's a huge cost to it, and the clock is ticking. I mean, we had a major flood back in '53 where many people died. So that's how we developed the proper coastal defense system. But this was developed, but not taking into account that the sea level would rise. So, and it took us to complete this, took us 40 years. We are a very, very tiny country with a very tiny coastline. So to put it in perspective, if you look at the coast of the US or the Italian coast or wherever, right? I mean, to do something, and if people haven't started doing it now, we are a bit too late.
How politics is reacting to all of this? Because
sorry,
how politics are reacting to this prospect? Because
there's a lot of people who are behind this backstage who are responding. The problem with politics is that if any political party in the Netherlands or elsewhere would present what needs to be done, what the scenario will be, and what the costs would be, they would never win the elections anymore. So I think in general, you can say that politicians are trying to avoid the real issues and put them on the table, because it's, sometimes it made me even feel that democracy fails us, because, you know, if we don't act now, it will be a disaster, and we owe it to the next generations that we keep this planet kind of livable. But it's very difficult, you know. I mean, we are used to our comfort zone. We are used that we were brought up that we would probably have a better life than our parents, and our parents were brought up that they would have a better life than their parents. But this is changing now. I mean, if we don't want to come out of our comfort zone and really act and are prepared to do 2 steps back, it's not going to look good.
Yeah, I was asking also because I'm finding pretty frightening is the fact that we have this huge change, huge crisis, and on the other hand, we have the rise of populism, reality denial, and so it seems that the problem is doubled, and I don't know which kind of hope we can find in this situation.
Well, you know, I mean, so this is, I just thought, you know, you may be familiar with the current map. You see the shades of what Holland looks like today.
Yeah.
And this is what Holland could look like in 150 years from now. So, you know, I mean, I don't know. I mean, there are different ways to look at it because, you know, I mean, we can get very depressed and think we are all going down and we're going to drown. At the same time, you know, I mean, the sea level has been much higher before. It has been much lower before. The only difference is that this is happening now, not in a time span of 1,000 years, but this happens in 2 generations. But as I said, you know, I mean, we lost our ability to adapt as well. You know, I mean, people in Bangladesh and elsewhere, they get themselves sandbags, they move to a higher point, or they move to the city, whatever. We don't, you know, I mean, we believe that we are here to stay in Amsterdam or Venice or Miami or elsewhere, right? There will be a point that we will give up. We have to give up some coastal regions, which is maybe painful, but it's also, you know, that's the way how it is nowadays. So we do have to live on this planet together, and you know, I mean, obviously we're following the news in Italy. I saw that the state of emergency was called by the Italian government because you're still getting these incredible numbers of refugees. I personally think there's a problem now because, you know, I mean, many of the refugees which are coming to Europe, they might not be coming from Syria or Iraq and are refugees because of war, but they are coming from regions in the world where there's no clean drinking water anymore, where people can't farm their land, where they can't have a livelihood or they end up in cities like Lagos. So, you know, I mean, many of the people we are seeing crossing the Mediterranean or coming to Europe are people who are leaving their land because of reasons which are connected to the climate. But as I said, it's not addressed, you know. We divided now the world into that you have people who are refugees who flee a war, and you have people who come for economic reasons.
Yeah. But traveling all around the world to follow this topic, have you found some situation of war created by the climate change?
I think there are many. I think most of the conflicts are related to the climate crisis nowadays, because, you know, I mean, there's a lot of conflicts which are related to water resources, clean water resources, water at all. People moving because of droughts. So I think many of the conflicts you can are related to this and are a source of what we see happening with the climate.
Okay. So that's the end of the presentation, and I have just one question about the process, your process of work, because I heard on another talk that you did in your photography, in your work, a photograph has a fraction of research. So I'm interested in how do you made your research, how your process when you made a photographic project, maybe also the other can be interesting.
You mean how important research is in my work?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
It's crucial. You know, all all my projects, they start with research, because I think, I mean, first of all, you need to know what you're talking about. And obviously, if I make any claims, like I made quite a few claims just now, I have to be absolutely sure that they are not false and that they are verified. So, I mean, it doesn't matter if you're a writer, a filmmaker, or a photographer. I think for stories like this, the research is essential. So I spend a lot more time on researching than on actually shooting.
I was meaning that.
And I mean, it's important more than ever, right? Because everything is questioned nowadays. So people ask me if my picture is real, if those people are real, if it's not photoshopped. I mean, when I started, that was not really the issue, right? I mean, there was kind of a general acceptance that obviously a photograph is always subjective, because I'm the one who's deciding when I push the button and where I'm pointing the camera to. But it is a reality. So I better be sure and very convincing that what you see is real and that there hasn't been any manipulation. So, like working for Washington Post or New York Times forces you also, I mean, I have to have at least two independent sources which are verified before I can write anything in a caption or in a text.
Yeah.
And I think that's important, right? Because you can, I mean, you can Google whatever, but you better know if what you're reading is true or not.
Yeah, sure. Okay, just another question. How do you choose the place where you go? For example, for After the Deluge, how did you choose the place to investigate?
Well, I mean, I could work for another century on this. So, I mean, well, first of all, I wanted, as I said earlier, I wanted to show that this is a global issue and that this is not limited to somewhere far away, but that this is also happening around the corner. And that's not necessarily the case that the government in Europe or the US is taking better care of its citizens than a government in somewhere in the Pacific or in Bangladesh. So, I mean, the criteria was that I really wanted to show regions where it was happening, where people were affected. The exception was maybe the Netherlands, because, we don't really, that's the problem. We feel very safe behind our dikes. The streets normally don't flood. So people, I grew still up with my parents and my grandparents would tell me that you had to be fearful of the sea. I don't think that fear exists anymore. I'm sitting here like freaking 4 meters below sea level.
Yeah.
So I don't think a lot of people, that's not what's on people's minds anymore, that they are below sea level. Sure. Funny enough, many people would say to me, well, those people in the Delta of Bangladesh, why they should not live there? It's too dangerous. Why would they live there? So I would say, well, here we are in the Delta in the Netherlands, very similar to, and then we even below sea level. So how stupid is that?
Yeah, I think that is very important. The mixture. I was asking because I think that watching the complete series is very important. It's very interesting because we in the West tend to we don't give we don't give a real importance to that matter. And I think that with your work, we can see that something is happening also here. And that's very important because I think that we are still in a cage of denial. While in some other part of the world, there are people who are losing the land, who are losing the houses. And so it's very important to see that also here we are seeing some clear sign of what is happening. So that's why I was asking. And the sequence is very effective from this point of view. Because also the glacier, it seems that is something far away. Okay, we also see ice, so we think that okay, glacier, but there will be more ice. That's not a problem. When we see in Miami what is happening, maybe something changed in the mind of people. So because we are the first responsible.
Well, you would think so, but I've been very puzzled about Miami because Miami is still thriving on real estate. They're still building like crazy. But you know, last time when I was there, I interviewed a broker, right, who was selling these penthouses, and he said to me, we have one mortgage round to go, and then it's over. So it's just making quick money and take a run.
Grab and run, the typical grab and run. Okay. So thank you very much, Kadir. I don't know. I think that there are no more questions because I was watching on the chat. There are no other questions. So thank you very much for your presentation and for your work. We'll see you soon at Trieste Photo Days. So hopefully, and
yeah, okay. I'll come and check what Trieste will look like in 50 years, right?
Yeah. Sure.
I don't know, actually. I know Venice doesn't look good, but I assume that Trieste is not going to be much better, right? Anyway, for now, I will be very happy to come and enjoy the beauty.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.